features in this dashboard tutorial include step-by-step guidance. This tutorial is designed to be beginner-friendly with clear instructions and easy-to-follow steps that guide you through the entire process of creating your first dashboard. Also, no prior knowledge required. It is suitable for everyone, regardless of your prior knowledge of Excel dashboards. Secondly, this tutorial will offer a comprehensive content covering essential tools and features in Excel for dashboard creation, from basic to intermediate concepts. Thirdly, this tutorial will cover various visualization tools such as charts, graphs, and tables to represent data effectively. Additionally, it will include design principles and tips to ensure your dashboard is not only functional, but also visually appealing. With that said, let's get started. First thing we will do is format the data as a table. This ensures that the table automatically expands when new data is added. To format the data as a table, we will use the keyboard shortcut key, Control-T. It has correctly detected the table range, and this table has headers, so we'll click OK. Let's go ahead and rename both the table and the sheet. Next, we will create our pivot tables. To do this, select Summarize with Pivot Table from the Table Design tab. The table range is correct, and we will place this pivot table on a new worksheet, so we will click OK. Just as we did for the raw data set, let's rename both the sheet and the pivot table. Since we'll be conducting some sort of trend analysis with this pivot table, let's name it Trend Pivot. Since for this pivot table, we want to perform a trend analysis of sales over the years, we will place years in the row field and price in the value field. We want to analyze the cumulative sales percentage, so we'll place price again in the values field. To calculate the cumulative sales percentage, click on the Sum of Price Values field, then select Value Field Settings. Under that, click on Show Values As and choose Percentage Running Total In. Let's proceed to rename this column as Percentage Cumulative. Before we plot our chart, let's format these as numbers. Under Category, we will select Number, set the number of decimal places to 0, choose to use the thousand separator, and then click OK. Now that we have formatted our pivot table, we can proceed to create our pivot chart. To do this, we will click on the Pivot Table Analyze tab and select Pivot Chart. Let's go ahead and select a combo chart since we want to plot both the changes in sales per year and the cumulative percentage of sales each year. We will place the percentage cumulative line chart on a secondary axis and then click OK. Let's delete these field buttons since we will be using slicers in our dashboard and do not need them. To do this, right-click on any of the field buttons and select Hide All Field Buttons on Chart. We will also move the legend to the top and resize the chart a little bit. We won't spend much time designing the chart at this point, so let's proceed to create our second pivot table and chart. To ensure that our second pivot table shares the same data source as the first, we will simply copy the trend pivot sheet. To do this, press and hold the Control key while dragging the sheet to create a duplicate of the trend pivot sheet. Just like we did for the first pivot table, let's go ahead and rename both the sheet and the pivot table. For this pivot table, we will use another combo chart. We'll focus on the sum of sales per fuel type and also the cumulative percentage of sales per fuel type. We will simply change the row field from year to fuel type. To do this, we will remove year from the row field and replace it with fuel type. Notice how the percentage cumulative column suddenly shows NA. This happens because in the first pivot table, we calculated the percentage cumulative sales using the sum of sales per year. We need to update this calculation to use the sum of sales per fuel type. To fix this, we will go back into the value field settings. Under Show Values As, we will change the base field from year to fuel type. Let's go ahead and sort the data from largest to smallest so it's easy to compare different categories at a glance. Moving on to our next pivot table and chart, we will essentially copy the second pivot table sheet just as we did before. For this pivot table, we want to analyze the sales per body type. First, let's rename both the sheet and the pivot table to body type pivot. Next, we will remove fuel type from the row field and replace it with body type. Since we are not interested in the cumulative percentage for this chart, we will remove that as well. Since we have long category names for body type, let's change the chart from a column to a bar chart. Bar charts handle long category names better, as they are easier to read horizontally. Moving ahead, let's format this chart a bit. First, we will sort it from largest to smallest. Additionally, we will use data labels for this chart, so let's remove the horizontal axis. Let's also remove the legend since it's redundant with just a single category. Additionally, we'll remove the chart title for now, as we will create titles when designing the dashboard. Next, let's proceed to create our final pivot chart for this dashboard. First, let's copy the body type sheet as we have done for the others. We want to analyze the sum of sales for the top 5 selling brands, so let's rename both the sheet and the pivot table as Brand Pivot. Having done that, let's proceed to remove body type from the row field and replace it with brand. This looks a bit messy, so let's clean it up. First, let's filter for the top 5 selling brands. Click on the drop-down arrow on the Row Labels column, then select Value Filters and choose Top 10. Since we're analyzing the top 5 selling brands, let's change the number of items from 10 to 5 and then click OK. We will also change the chart from a bar to a column chart since there are only 5 categories. We will also go ahead to sort the data from largest to smallest, so it's easy to compare different categories at a glance. Before we create our dashboard, we will set up some KPIs. As we did with all the pivot tables and charts, let's copy the brand pivot sheet to ensure that the KPIs are also linked to the same source data. The KPIs we want to create are the sum of sales, the count of total units sold, and the average price per unit sold. To do this, we will remove brand from the row field and add price again to the values field. We want the second KPI to be a count of total units sold, so we will change it from sum of sales to count of sales. To do this, click on the second sum of price in the values field and select Value Field Settings. Under Summarize Values By, change from sum to count and click OK. The final KPI we want to create is the average price per unit. To do this, we will simply divide the total sum of sales by the total number of units sold. We will do some number formatting here. First, set the number of decimal places for the average price per unit to 0. Additionally, we will format the numbers to use M for millions and K for thousands to make them easier to comprehend since the figures are large. To do this, we will right-click on each of the numbers and select Number Format. Under the Category section, choose Custom. For thousands, use a 0 followed by a single comma and a K. For millions, use a 0 followed by double commas and an M, just as shown on the screen. We will format the numbers in the same way in all the other pivot tables. Finish plotting our pivot charts and creating our KPIs so we can proceed to build our dashboard. We will create our dashboard on a new sheet, so let's go ahead and do that. The first step in designing our dashboard is creating the layout. We will use shapes from the Insert tab to design this layout, so let's go ahead and do that. For now, let's keep the grid lines so we can use it to properly align all the shapes. Having said that, let's remove the shape outlines and add some effects to the shapes. With that done, we will go ahead and copy the shape for all the different pivot charts and KPIs we will use for this dashboard. Next, we will remove the grid lines and change the background color. We want the various tiles to be white, so we will go ahead and change that as well. Next, we will go ahead and name this dashboard. With that done, we will go ahead and create titles for each of our tiles. For now, we will copy and paste the same title on each tile and edit the titles as we add the charts. We will now go ahead and copy all our charts to the dashboard. With that done, we will proceed with resizing and reformatting. First, we will resize the charts so they fit nicely in the tiles. Let's go ahead and change the design to something more aesthetically pleasing. Next, we want a no fill and no border lines for the charts, so we will go ahead and make those changes. To do this, right-click on the chart and select Format Chart Area. Under that, choose No Fill and No Line for the border. We also want our chart titles to have no border lines, so we will remove the border lines for them as well. With that done, we will go ahead and format all the other pivot charts in the same way. With the charts formatted, the next step is to copy our KPIs to the dashboard. We want to ensure that they are dynamic and update automatically with the data set. The syntax we will use for this is the sheet name, which in this case will be KPI, followed by an exclamation mark and the cell name. Let's go ahead and apply some formatting. Let's go ahead and copy this for the other KPIs and change the sheet names to properly reflect the corresponding KPI. With that done, we will go ahead and remove the outlines for the shapes, just as we did for the pivot charts. Before we proceed to create our slicers, you will notice that the chart titles have the same generic name we used from the beginning. Let's go ahead and change that. We will now proceed to create the final component of this dashboard, slicers. Slicers offer an easy-to-use interface for filtering data, allowing users to quickly and easily change the data displayed in the dashboard. Users can select multiple items within a slicer, enabling more complex and customized data views without extensive manipulation. Having said that, like many other tasks in Excel, there are multiple ways to insert a slicer into our dashboard. One way to do it is by going into the Pivot Chart Analyze tab and selecting Slicer. For this dashboard, we will select slicers for the year, transmission type, and seller type. So let's go ahead and do that. You will notice that the chart for sales per top 5 selling brands is the only chart changing when we filter with our slicers. This is because it is the only chart currently linked to our slicers. Let's go ahead and link the slicers to the other charts. To do this, right-click on the slicer, select Report Connections, and check all the pivot charts you want to link to that particular slicer. Having done that, we now achieve the interactivity we want for this dashboard. This concludes our dashboard tutorial. Thank you for taking the time to watch this tutorial. I hope you found it helpful and enjoyable. Please like and subscribe for more content like this.